New York in winter had a way of turning softness into stone. For Nia Carter, the cold didn't just bite, it remembered. It remembered her mother's hands slipping out of hers in the hospital room. It remembered the nights she walked home alone after a double shift, fingers numb, telling herself tomorrow would be better. And tonight, as snow drifted through the neon haze of Bleecker Street, the cold remembered her dreams too, especially the ones that kept slipping away. The email had arrived barely an hour earlier. We regret to inform you. 6 months of preparing a portfolio, one sleepless week spent stitching a prototype jacket, one borrowed dress for a Zoom interview gone in a single line. Nia wasn't the kind of woman who cried in public, but the rejection had cracked something in her, leaving sharp edges inside her chest. So she pushed herself into the nearest doorway with a glowing sign and warm music, a small bar tucked between a vinyl store and a late-night florist. She wasn't here to drink. She just needed the jazz. She moved toward the dimmest corner, unbuttoning her coat as the saxophone washed over her. She inhaled deeply. Just 10 minutes, she told herself. 10 minutes to breathe. Then you can fall apart later. But life rarely honored 10-minute deals. She didn't notice the man coming out of the VIP room until he was already too close. He walked fast, tall frame, cutting through the crowd, one hand braced against his phone, the other holding a glass of whiskey. He wasn't looking ahead. His attention split between the call and whatever storm was brewing behind those tense shoulders. Nia sidestepped instinctively, but he pivoted at the same moment. Their bodies collided, her shoulder slamming into his chest, hard enough to knock a breath from both of them. The whiskey flew upward, splashing across her coat in a warm, smoky wave. "Jesus!" Nia gasped, stumbling back. "I'm so sorry." The man's phone slipped from his ear. He looked up, and she froze. His eyes, icy gray with flecks of winter blue, locked onto hers with startled intensity. He wasn't just handsome. He was painfully, dangerously handsome. As if someone had carved a jawline out of marble, then softened it with exhaustion. Dark blonde hair fell slightly into his eyes, and there was something strained in the way he held himself, as though he'd been carrying too much for too long. "It's my fault," he said, voice low and rough, like gravel under snow. "I wasn't watching where I was going." He set the glass on the nearest table, but didn't look away from her. His attention sharpened, deepened, as if something about her tugged at a memory hidden behind his tired expression. "You," his brows pulled together. "Do I know you?" The question hung between them, absurd and intimate. Nia let out a short, breathless laugh. "Pretty sure I'd remember if we'd met." The corner of his mouth lifted an expression so fleeting she almost doubted she'd seen it. Something about her voice, or maybe the truthfulness of her eyes, had eased whatever armor he was wrapped in. Before either of them could say more, a wave of harsh lights burst through the bar's entrance. Cameras, shouting, a stampede of paparazzi shoved through the crowd, lenses glinting like predatory eyes. "There he is," a voice barked. "Holton James over here." Nia's stomach dropped. James Holton. That name she recognized. The investment wunderkind turned fashion mogul. CEO of Holton Designs, one of the biggest luxury brands in the world. Youngest billionaire in his sector. Interviews calling him brilliant, ruthless private, to the point of myth. And this man, the one standing inches from her, was him. The bar began to buzz with intrusive energy as reporters surged closer. Is it true you're pulling out of the Paris deal? Why cancel your appearance at the summit? Who's the woman with you? James? Naya stiffened. Her entire body screamed, wrong place, wrong time. James didn't answer a single question. Instead, he leaned toward her, his voice low and urgent. Come with me. I what? No, I'm not. If you stay, your face will be everywhere in 10 minutes. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. And his eyes, sharp but sincere, told her he meant to protect her from a media circus she'd never survive. His hand closed around her wrist. Firm, not forceful. Guided, not grabbed. Naya hesitated only a heartbeat before letting him pull her through a side door into the alley behind the bar. The noise faded. The cold hit them like a slap. Their breath rose in clouds under a flickering street lamp. Snow had begun to fall again, dancing in the yellow light like stray glitter tossed by the city. James released her wrist immediately, exhaling hard. I'm sorry about that. It's fine. Naya hugged her wet coat around herself. I guess you're used to being chased. His laugh was humorless. Used to it, yes. Fond of it, no. He paced a step, running a hand through his hair. The movement pulled his coat open, revealing a crisp white shirt, slightly wrinkled at the collar, as though he'd been fighting with the night for hours. You shouldn't be anywhere near me right now, he said, turning back to her. The press is hungry, and I gave them blood by showing my face tonight. I didn't exactly choose to run into you, she replied, crossing her arms, not defensively, more like holding herself together. His gaze flicked to her coat, still damp with whiskey. Regret flashed across his face. I really am sorry about your jacket. It's okay. I've had worse things spilled on me during coffee shifts. She tried to smile. At least it wasn't pasta sauce. A real smile tugged at his lips. It changed him. Softened the lines carved into his face, made him look less like a headline and more like a man. But then his expression shifted, curiosity sharpening. You're oddly calm. Should I be screaming? She asked lightly. Most people do when cameras are involved. Well, I'm not most people. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt charged, humming with something unnamed. James studied her with a focus that made her pulse flutter. Not because of his fame, but because he looked at her as if she had suddenly become the only clear thing in a blurred world. He stepped closer. Slow, deliberate. There's something about you, he murmured. I can't place it, but it feels like I've seen you before. Not in passing. Really seen you. Nia shook her head, letting out a soft breath. You probably confuse me with someone from your world. What world do you think that is? He asked. The one with red carpets and contracts and private security. She gestured at the deserted alley. This isn't my orbit. What if I don't like my orbit? His honesty startled her. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. More like a confession he hadn't planned to say out loud. She studied him. Then the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the loneliness buried beneath expensive fabrics. He wasn't just tired. He was worn thin. Why do I get the feeling, she said softly, that you didn't mean to end up here tonight? His breath paused, not in shock, more like recognition, because he answered quietly, You're the first person who's asked me something real all week. Snow settled on his shoulders as the silence thickened with unspoken things. Naya looked away first, her pulse uneven. She didn't like being drawn into a stranger's gravity, especially not a man like him, powerful, complicated, capable of altering the trajectory of her life with a single decision. She had promised herself she'd avoid this kind of man, the kind who shines too brightly and burns everything in his orbit. "I should go," she whispered. James straightened. "I didn't mean to keep you." "No, I just don't want to make your mess my problem." He stepped toward her again, not closing the distance, just narrowing it enough that she could feel the warmth beneath the winter air. "You're not a problem, Nia." Her name in his mouth startled her. "I never told you." "You dropped your wallet in the bar," he said, lifting the object she hadn't realized was missing. "I saw your ID," Nia swallowed. "You should have just handed it back." "I was going to," he said, and there was something like regret in his voice. But then those cameras came in. She took the wallet. Their fingers didn't touch yet. Her skin tingled as if they had. "Thank you," she murmured. James inhaled as though bracing himself. "I still think I've seen you before, and I still think you're wrong." "Maybe." His eyes softened. "Maybe not." A siren wailed down the street, echoing off the brick walls. The moment fractured. Naya turned toward the main road. "Good night, James." He hesitated, something flickering across his face, a silent plea or a warning she couldn't decipher. "Good night, Nia." She walked away first. He watched her go. Two strangers in the snow, stepping back into their separate lives. Neither knowing the collision they dismissed as coincidence was anything but. Neither aware that this night had altered the orbit of everything that came after. Because sometimes fate doesn't whisper. Sometimes it crashes into you, spills whiskey on your coat, and looks at you with eyes that remember what your heart has not yet learned to believe. And for the first time in a very long time, James Holton felt awake. While Nia Carter walked into the night with a feeling she couldn't explain, as if the world had quietly shifted beneath her feet. Morning sunlight slid through the blinds of Nia's tiny studio like thin gold ribbons, far too cheerful for how she felt. She lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment from last night for what had to be the 100th time. "I didn't imagine it," she told herself. She could still feel the warmth of his hand closing around her wrist, still hear the way he'd said her name as if it mattered, as if he'd spoken it before. Colliding with James Holton, the man the media called Manhattan's cold front, wasn't the sort of thing that happened to girls like her. Girls who lived in sixth-floor walk-ups with leaky faucets. Girls who spent Sunday nights altering thrift store jackets into fashion pieces no one would ever see. Girls who were trying to hold their lives together with willpower and leftover takeout. It had been surreal, accidentally cinematic, but that was all. "Nia," she scolded herself as she sat up. "Stop thinking about a man who lives on a different planet." She showered quickly, braided her hair neatly, and put on the cleanest outfit she owned, dark trousers and a simple blouse. Nothing fancy, but polished. The whiskey-stained coat had dried overnight, leaving a faint scent she tried not to notice. Today was too important. Her interview at Holton Designs was a long shot on its best day and an act of delusion on all the others. She wasn't from Parsons or Effete. She didn't come from money. Her resume wasn't glossy. It was real, messy, full of part-time jobs and creative work done between rent payments. But she had to try. By the time she reached the sleek marble lobby of Holton Designs headquarters, her palms had grown damp. The building towered above her like a monument to everything she wasn't: wealth, elegance, generational inevitability. The receptionist guided her to the executive floor. Inside the elevator, Naya stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls, a young black woman with bright, uncertain eyes, a too-tight smile, and a coat that still faintly smelled of last night. "It's fine," she whispered to herself. "You'll be fine." But the moment she stepped toward the interview room, her heart leapt into her throat. The man standing by the desk was unmistakable. Broad shoulders under a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, golden morning light glancing off a jaw so sharp it could cut glass. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd run his hands through it too many times. James Holton, the same man who'd stood with her in the snow, the same eyes that had watched her walk away as if he wasn't ready to let her go. He looked up. Recognition hit him hard. His expression tightened, then softened, then widened with something like disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he murmured. Heat crawled up the back of Nia's neck. "Oh no," she whispered. "No, no, no. This cannot be happening." For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. Two people caught in a moment neither had anticipated. The assistant standing off to the side blinked rapidly, confused. James cleared his throat, straightened, and softened his tone. "Please, have a seat." Naya's legs carried her forward, even as her brain screamed to turn and run. How could fate be this cruel? Running into him once was improbable. Twice, inside his building, bordered on cosmic mockery. "I wasn't expecting you," James said carefully. "Believe me," she exhaled. "If I could have prevented this, I would have." A subtle twitch touched his lips, though he tried to suppress it. She could tell he was amused, and that somehow only mortified her more. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, studying her as if she were a puzzle piece in the wrong box. "About last night," Nia blurted, lifting a hand in protest. "Please don't bring that up." He blinked. "Don't bring up the part where you dragged me into an alley, or where you told me I might end up on Twitter, or where I bumped into you like a human wrecking ball." She exhaled sharply. "None of that happened. As far as I'm concerned, we've never met." James tilted his head, the ghost of a smile tugging at him. "You're interesting. I'd prefer employable." His gaze deepened steadier now, more intentional. "I don't think you're the type to manipulate a situation to your advantage." Nia looked down at her hands. "Maybe not. But it would be very easy for you to think I'm trying to." "And are you?" he asked softly. Her eyes shot up, irritation crossing her face. "Of course not." Something warm flickered behind his cool exterior, but before she could decipher it, he stood abruptly, taking a slow step toward her. The air shifted with him. Charged, intimate, disarming. "You didn't tell me you were interviewing here," he said. "You didn't tell me you owned the place," she countered bluntly. His gaze swept her face with unsettling precision. "You're wearing that same coat." Nia stiffened. "So, it's a good coat." "It smells like my drink from last night," he said quietly. "And it's making it very difficult for me to think straight." Her breath caught. She opened her mouth. She wasn't sure to argue or apologize, but the office door swung open with a sharp click. A tall, blonde woman strode inside on lethal heels. Perfect makeup, designer dress, a cool, predatory confidence. She looked like she'd stepped out of a Vogue editorial and brought her ego with her. "Sabrina Wells," she announced, barely glancing at Nia. creative director. Then she turned to James, voice turning sweet and poisonous. I thought we were interviewing candidates, James, not entertaining acquaintances. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it. A deliberate condescension, a dismissal wrapped in glitter that stung. James's expression iced over. She is a candidate. Sabrina's gaze finally settled on Nia, gliding from the braid in her hair to the coat on her shoulders. A slow, mocking smile curved her lips. In that coat? Really, James? The position requires someone who understands presentation. Nia felt the familiar weight, the one that had followed her through every room where she wasn't supposed to belong. But she held Sabrina's gaze steadily, refusing to shrink. James stepped closer to Nia, his posture, protective voice, edged in steel. I decide who joins this department, not you. Sabrina's eyes widened a fraction. She clearly wasn't used to being contradicted. James turned back to Nia, his tone shifting gentler, deliberate. You're hired. The words slammed into her. I didn't even interview yet. I've seen what I need to see. His eyes held hers unblinking. You notice details. You think for yourself. You're honest even when it's inconvenient. And you don't crumble under pressure. His jaw tightened. We need people like you here. Sabrina made a small, furious sound at the back of her throat. But why me, Nia managed. There were dozens of applicants. James's expression softened just slightly. Because you're the first person in a very long time who hasn't tried to impress me. Nia's pulse stuttered. She couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a warning. Sabrina crossed her arms. You can't be serious. James shot her a look so cold, the room seemed to drop several degrees. I'm not in the habit of repeating myself. Silence swallowed the air. Sabrina backed down, seething. Nia felt dizzy, caught between disbelief and instinctive fear. This world was sharp, political, built on power plays and polished surfaces. Everything about it warned her she didn't belong. But the way James looked at her, something like certainty, something like recognition, made her feel as if stepping inside might change her life. Why do I feel like I just walked into something dangerous? She whispered. James held her gaze, eyes dark with something unreadable. Because you did. She swallowed. And you still want me here. A slow breath left him. More than I should. For one suspended second, the rest of the room faded, the tension, the marble walls, Sabrina's hostility. It was just them. Two worlds colliding a second time. Nia didn't yet understand what it meant to step into James Holton's orbit, but she could feel the gravity shifting already. And deep down, beneath her fear and her uncertainty, a quiet truth unfurled. Her life had just changed direction, whether she was ready for it or not. On her first official day at Holton Designs, Nia understood something swiftly and unequivocally. James Holton didn't merely run the company, he moved through it like electricity. Every step he took was purposeful, every instruction efficient, every gaze sharp enough to cut through excuses before they were spoken. He demanded excellence, but gave it twice over. People fell in line, not out of fear, but because falling behind meant disappearing into his shadow. Yet somehow, inexplicably, the man slowed down whenever he reached her desk. By mid-morning, she had watched him glide through 3 meetings, reorganize a production schedule on the fly, and then turn toward her with an expression that didn't match the ruthless reputation plastered across business magazines. Should I reorganize your afternoon by urgency? She asked carefully. Or by internal deadlines? James didn't even glance at the digital planner she'd pulled up. By whatever order you think makes the most sense. Nia blinked. You're trusting me with that. His eyes flicked to hers, steady and unsettlingly warm. If I couldn't trust your judgment, you wouldn't be here. It was a simple sentence, but for someone whose ideas were too often dismissed, too often overshadowed by people louder or richer or lighter skinned, the words hit deeper than she expected. And of course, Sabrina didn't miss the moment. The creative director's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she passed Nia's workstation. "Trust is earned," she said sweetly, though the sweetness was only a knife dipped in honey. "Let's see if it lasts." Nia kept her head down. She'd built armor from worse comments. Still, she could feel James' pause behind her. He didn't say anything, but she sensed the way his presence cooled the air. Sabrina walked faster after that. Throughout the afternoon, Nia grew more aware of how James observed her, not intrusively, but attentively, like he was memorizing the rhythm of how she worked. When she accidentally knocked over a stack of documents, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She bent down immediately. "Sorry, I'm still getting used to no apologies necessary." James crouched beside her, helping gather the papers. "I don't hire people because they're perfect." He met her gaze, then close enough that she could see faint circles under his eyes, proof that even billionaires didn't outrun exhaustion. Something inside her chest shifted, and something inside his softened. That evening, Naya stepped out of the elevator to find Cutter standing in the lobby, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Dark curls, messy from the wind. He grinned when he saw her, his warm, familiar grin that always felt like home. "There she is," he said. "How'd it go? No one tried to eat you alive?" "Not yet," she laughed. "Maybe tomorrow." Cutter leaned against the railing, looking through the glass wall into the office behind her. His gaze snagged on the conference room. James was standing beside Sabrina, reviewing something on a tablet. But his attention wasn't really on the screen. He kept glancing toward the hallway toward her. Cutter's smile faded imperceptibly. "You seem different," he said slowly. "Lighter. Do I?" Nia shifted her bag on her shoulder. "Yeah. Haven't seen that smile in a while." He hesitated. "Is that because of the job? Or because of your boss?" Heat crept into her cheeks. "Cutter, I'm serious." His tone hardened just slightly. "That guy, James, he doesn't look like someone who gives without wanting something back." Nia stiffened. "You don't even know him. That's exactly why I'm worried." Cutter stepped closer, lowering his voice. "People like him, they don't play on the same field as people like us. They don't follow the same rules. This isn't about rules," she argued. "It's just work." Cutter studied her carefully, the concern in his eyes older than the years they'd known each other. "I just don't want to see you hurt. You've worked too damn hard to let someone like him get inside your head." Her breath caught. The words "someone like him" echoed uncomfortably, not in a prejudiced way, but in a way that meant power money influence. The kind of man who could change the course of her life without meaning to. Or worse, without caring. Nia swallowed. "You're worrying too much." "Maybe." Cutter stepped back, forcing a smile. "Maybe I'm being dramatic." But the strain in his voice told her he wasn't. As they walked out into the crisp evening, something unspoken formed a fault line between them. A tension neither fully recognized, but both felt. Cutter's steps were slower. His glances lingered longer. Questions hovered at the edges of his silence. Naya didn't ask them. She wasn't sure she wanted to know the answers. That night, her apartment felt unusually quiet. Too quiet for her whirling mind. She couldn't stop replaying the day, James's voice, his steady confidence in her, the way he'd leaned just a little too close when showing her how to use the internal system. She'd smelled the faint citrus of his cologne, felt the warmth radiating from him, caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. He's just being a good boss, she told herself. But was he? She dropped her bag, threw herself onto her bed, and stared at the ceiling. Cutter's warning echoed in her mind. They don't follow the same rules. Yet the way James had looked at her didn't feel like games or manipulation. It felt searching. It felt like the snow-lit alleyway all over again. Two people encountering something neither had prepared for. Was she imagining it? She rolled onto her side, pulling her blanket with her, when suddenly her phone buzzed. A message from a number, not in her contacts. She sat up slowly. 7:30 a.m. Don't eat breakfast. We need to talk. JH. Her heart skipped. Talk about what the text wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't commanding. It wasn't even friendly. It was neutral enough that she couldn't guess the intention, but personal enough that her breath caught in her throat. Why so early? Why privately? Why her? And why did a part of her deep, unguarded, traitorous hope? The reason wasn't about work. She typed nothing back. She read it again. Again. The city hummed beyond her window, but Naya heard nothing except the steady, accelerating beat of her own heart. Something was happening. Something she didn't have a name for yet. But she knew two things with startling clarity. Whatever tomorrow morning brought, it wouldn't be ordinary, and if she didn't guard her heart carefully, James Holton might be the one danger she couldn't walk away from. The next morning, at exactly 7:30, Naya found James standing in front of a tiny cafe tucked between two boutiques on Mercer Street. A soft winter haze drifted over the pavement, turning the neighborhood into a watercolor. James didn't look like a billionaire in this setting. He looked almost ordinary. Or rather, he looked like someone trying hard to be. You picked this place, she asked, breath forming a small cloud in the cold air. He adjusted his coat. This was my mother's favorite spot. Whenever she thought the city was suffocating us, she brought me here. Said it reminded her to stay grounded. The statement knocked the wind out of Nia in a way she didn't expect. Not many men spoke about their mothers with that kind of softness. Not many powerful men, at least. Inside the cafe smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. A jazz track hummed quietly from a vintage speaker, and for a moment it was easy to imagine the child version of James sitting in one of these booths, swinging his legs, watching a woman trace circles on the rim of her cup. They chose a corner table. Nothing about this meeting resembled a corporate breakfast. There were no folders, no tablets, no brisk introductions. Instead, James watched her with a look that made her wonder if he'd been up all night thinking about her. He didn't dive into schedules or deliverables. He asked about her drawings, the way her grandmother used to braid her hair while telling stories, the first time she realized she wanted to create worlds rather than just live in one. You said yesterday that design wasn't your original dream, he said, stirring his coffee. What was Nia hesitated? Illustration. Comic art specifically. She smiled faintly. I used to draw characters during math class and hoped nobody noticed. Did they? He asked. My teachers did. My parents didn't. They were too busy trying to keep the lights on. She shrugged. Dreams felt like a luxury, something other people could afford. James's gaze lingered on her longer than was safe. You speak like someone who learned to survive early. She blinked at him, surprised by the accuracy. Why do you say that? Because you don't talk about your dreams as if they were childish, he said slowly. You talk about them like they were stolen. Nia's breath caught. She didn't know whether to thank him or get up and run. He had an uncanny way of seeing past the edges she kept polished. The waiter arrived with their breakfast, 2 plates of scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. But halfway through the meal, James set down his fork, leaned back, and studied her as though a question had been building inside him the entire time. Nia, he said quietly, do you believe in first impressions? She tilted her head. Depends. Some people decide who I am before I even speak. A small pause. Because of my skin, because of my hair, because of the neighborhood I grew up in. She shrugged lightly. I've stopped trying to correct their assumptions. James didn't flinch or attempt to soften her words. So yes, he murmured. Sometimes people judge you before they know you. She nodded. He leaned in slightly. But that wasn't what I meant. There was something new in his voice, uncertainty, even vulnerability. He kept his eyes on her, and the intensity of his focus made her fingers curl around her cup. I meant, he continued, do you believe 2 people can see each other once and know instantly that it means something? Nia's pulse jolted. She forced a laugh. That sounds like something out of a romance novel. Humor me. She played with the edge of her napkin. I guess sometimes you meet someone who feels familiar, even if they shouldn't. James exhaled the sound soft and aching. That's exactly it, Nia swallowed. Are you saying you still think you've met me before? He didn't blink. Yes. She leaned back. But how? Where I haven't exactly been in the same rooms as billionaires. That's not what I meant, he said. When I saw you in that bar, I had this flash. Like a memory I couldn't quite catch. His brows drew together. Or maybe it's intuition, but it hasn't gone away. The way he said it low and earnest made her throat tighten. She didn't know how to respond, and he didn't seem to expect her to. He simply added softer, I've never trusted my instincts about a person this strongly. Her heart thudded too loudly. She felt unsteady, as if the floor beneath them had shifted. But then, his phone buzzed sharply on the table, shattering the moment. James looked at the screen, and the shift in his expression was immediate, visceral, like watching a storm roll in. We have to go, he said, standing abruptly. Nia blinked. Is everything okay? No. He tossed some bills on the table. Something's gone very wrong. Her stomach sank. What happened? A falsified report was sent to our partners in Milan. They're threatening to pull out of the contract. His jaw tightened. And the blame is being directed at the newest team member. Nia froze. Me? His answer was instant. I don't believe that for a second. But whoever's behind it wants you implicated. Her fingers trembled around her purse strap. Why would anyone? Because you're close to me. His tone was clipped urgent. Closer than some people would like. The words struck her like ice. Close. Since when? Why did hearing it thrill and terrify her at the same time? He held the door open for her, and as they stepped out into the street, Nia felt the morning's warmth evaporate. A knot tightened in her chest, a familiar mixture of dread and injustice. She'd spent her entire life, outrunning assumptions. Now, she was being blamed for something she hadn't even touched. They walked fast, weaving through pedestrians. Every step toward the office made her breathing shallower. "James," she said, as they reached the curb, "if someone wants to sabotage you, why use me?" He looked at her then with a fierce protectiveness she didn't understand but recognized on some instinctual level. "Because you're the easiest target in their eyes," he said. "New, unconnected, and because you matter to me more than you should." Nia stumbled his words, hitting with too much force. But James didn't elaborate. He simply flagged a cab, held the door for her, and slid inside. As the car sped toward Holton Designs, Nia watched his reflection in the window jaw, clenched eyes burning with something dangerous. Fear, anger, guilt. Or was it something else entirely? Something that had been simmering between them since the night of the collision. She couldn't tell. But she could tell one thing with painful clarity. She had stepped into James Holton's world, and there were people waiting for her there, not to welcome her, but to see how fast she would fall. The closer they got to the office, the more certain Nia became. This wasn't just a work crisis. It wasn't even about the falsified report. Someone was watching. Someone was threatened. And someone had decided that the best way to get to James was through her. The moment Nia and James stepped back into Holton Designs, she felt it, the tension swirling through the lobby like a storm rolling off the Hudson. Whispers traveled ahead of them, heads tilted, screens dimmed. The air, once brisk and professional, now carried the metallic taste of accusation. On the mezzanine, Sabrina stood waiting with arms crossed, posture, immaculate expression sharpened to a dagger's edge. Her lipstick, usually immaculate, looked slightly smudged, as if she'd argued with her own reflection before coming down. "Perfect timing," she announced. "We were just discussing the little issue." James didn't break stride. "Which issue?" "The unauthorized access." Sabrina's eyes slid to Nia with slow, deliberate disdain. "It seems someone logged into the internal system, using our new assistant's credentials." The words hit like a slap. Nia felt her throat tighten. "That's impossible. I don't even have full credentials yet." "Exactly." Sabrina's smile stretched wider, brittle. "Funny how the ones with the least access always seem eager to prove themselves." The insinuation was clear and cruel and familiar in a way that made Nia's stomach twist, because she'd felt this kind of targeted scrutiny before. In classrooms, in internships, in job interviews where her portfolio was praised, but her fit was questioned. But she refused to shrink. "I didn't touch anything," she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I would never risk sabotaging a contract." James stepped forward, so sharply the room seemed to tilt. His tone was low, but blade sharp. She didn't do it. There was no hesitation, no caveat, no corporate neutrality, just unwavering certainty. Someone in the surrounding cluster of employees murmured, surprised. Sabrina's eyes narrowed, her nostrils flaring. "You're awfully confident for someone who wasn't here," she said. "Unless there's something you'd like to share. Something about your personal interest in this case." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Nia felt heat rush up her neck. Shame, anger, confusion. But before she could respond, James cut across the tension like a cold front. "Sabrina," he said, voice icy enough to frost the glass doors. You will not imply misconduct or favoritism in my staff without evidence. And you will absolutely not weaponize a person's background or position in this company. Several people turned toward him, startled at the explicit defense. And while we're clarifying things, he added, "Don't mistake my belief in her integrity for anything other than fact." Sabrina's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then she exhaled a brittle laugh. "Well, let's hope the facts are on your side." In the conference room, tension coiled like a trapped animal. Nia sat rigid, back straight, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles burned. She hated the way eyes flicked over her, some curious, some judgmental, some quietly rooting for her to fail. But the worst feeling was the one lodged beneath her ribs. What if this ruined everything? Not just her job, but the fragile thing building between her and James. Something she wasn't ready to name. James stood at the head of the table, a fortress of cold composure. "I want the system logs, all of them." The IT lead nodded and hurried out. Meanwhile, Sabrina took a deliberate seat across from Nia, crossing her legs slowly, as though posing for an editorial shoot. She didn't look at Nia, but the message was clear. "I'm still the queen here." Minutes passed. The ticking clock on the wall grew unbearably loud. Nia stared at her hands. Her palms were cold. Her jaw ached from clenching. She fought panic, fought the old ghosts that whispered she didn't belong in rooms like this. She reminded herself she'd earned her place. But the room didn't feel convinced. Finally, the IT specialist burst back in, nearly breathless. "We found the access point." Everyone leaned in. The login came from... He scanned the page, eyes widening from the workstation in the creative director's office. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Every head swung toward Sabrina. Her face drained of color, shock flickering quicker than she could hide. "What? That's not. There must be some mistake. Anyone could have used my..." In the hour it happened, the specialist continued. "The system shows your door was locked. No entries, no exits." Sabrina opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her composure cracked, the first visible fracture Nia had seen. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You'll speak with human resources, immediately." Her eyes flashed with something darker than anger, something personal. But when she stood, James shifted instinctively, blocking Sabrina from brushing too close to Nia as she passed. It was subtle, automatic, protective, and Nia felt it like a hand closing around her heart. Sabrina paused at the door. She turned her head just enough to let Nia see the venom simmering behind her polished facade. "This isn't over," she whispered. Then she was gone. When the room emptied, Nia's breath finally escaped her lungs. She hadn't realized she'd been holding it. Her hands were still trembling. James approached her slowly, as if wary she might break. He crouched beside her chair, lowering himself to her level instead of towering over her. "Hey," he said softly, softer than she'd ever heard him. "Look at me." She did. His eyes weren't cold now. They weren't calculating. They were warm, intense, unmasked. "You're safe," he murmured. "I won't let anyone touch you. Not in my company." Her composure fractured. "I was so scared," she admitted. Not just for the job, for how it looked, for how familiar it felt. James's jaw tightened with quiet fury. Not at her, but at the world that taught her to expect this. He reached for her wrist fingertips, brushing her skin. "Nee," he said, voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "You are not alone in this." The contact was small, barely a point of warmth between them, but the air around them thickened, charged. She felt it. He felt it. His thumb lingered a second too long. Her breath caught for a second too long. That was all it took for something unspoken to break free, something dangerous, something undeniable. James suddenly looked away, as if realizing how close he'd come to crossing a line he'd vowed never to cross. He cleared his throat, but the tension didn't lift. It deepened. "What they tried to do to you," he said, voice low, "it won't happen again. Not while I'm here." "Why?" she whispered before she could stop herself. "Why do you care this much?" He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was barely a breath. "Because losing you, even the idea of it." His eyes met hers again, open and raw. "Hit me harder than it should." Her heartbeat stuttered. James straightened abruptly, as if the admission frightened him, as if he'd exposed a piece of himself no one else was meant to see. "Take the rest of the afternoon off," he said, forced calm slipping over him like hastily drawn armor. "I'll handle the fallout." She stood slowly. "James." But he stepped back, not to push her away, but because getting any closer might shatter whatever control he still had left. "If something happens again," he said quietly, "you come to me first. Always." There was no room for argument, no room for misunderstanding. As she turned to leave, Nia felt his eyes follow her, not with scrutiny, not with suspicion, but with the kind of fear that comes from realizing you could lose something you never planned to want, something you never expected, something you can't let go of. And deep down, beneath the fear and exhaustion, Nia understood the truth. The sabotage was only the beginning. And whatever was happening between her and James, it was growing far faster than either of them was ready for. The week after the sabotage incident passed in a tense blur. No one spoke openly about what happened with Sabrina, but whispers clung to the hallways like dust. People lowered their voices when Nia walked by, not always maliciously, but curiously, calculatingly. Yet James was unchanged, at least outwardly. He worked harder, focused, sharper, and he made sure Nia was never left alone in vulnerable situations. He checked her schedules, reassigned her desk closer to his office, and subtly but unmistakably watched out for her. Nia noticed it all, and she pretended she didn't. But tonight, pretending became impossible. The company was preparing for its largest seasonal launch, a multimedia fashion tech showcase that demanded impossible hours. At 1:00 a.m., the office was a skeleton of itself. Lights dimmed, shadows stretched long across the floor, printers humming softly like distant insects. Everyone else had gone home. Only two people remained. James stood near the drafting table with his sleeves rolled up reviewing digital mock-ups. Nia sat beside him, pencil sliding over paper as she refined the sketches he'd proposed at the last minute. The quiet felt strangely intimate, like the city had shrunk to the size of the room. He watched her more than he watched the designs. She felt it. "Staring at me like that," she said, not looking up, "isn't helping me concentrate." James didn't move. I wasn't staring at the sketches. Her pencil paused. Then what were you staring at? You. Simple. Bare. Dangerous. The word hung in the air like suspended breath. Naya lifted her head slowly, unable to pretend anymore. Their eyes met, and in that instant the world receded, leaving only the glow of desk lamps and two people who had been pushing away the inevitable for far too long. Something unspoken flickered between them. James took a single step closer, movements measured as if giving her every opportunity to stop him. There's something I've been trying to tell you. You deserve to hear it. Her throat tightened. What is it? He hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because the truth carried weight. I think I finally know where I saw you before the night at the bar. Naya blinked, confused. Before that? When James's voice softened in a way she had never heard from him, deep, warm, fragile. Years ago, at that cafe on Mercer, you were helping behind the counter. I remember you handing me a cup of hot chocolate I didn't even want. Nia stared at him, stunned. My mother loved that place, he continued. She dragged me there whenever she needed to escape from everything. I was a miserable kid back then, always quiet, always watching the door instead of the world. He leaned in slightly. But then you walked over with this tiny smile, asking if I wanted marshmallows, even though I'd already said no. And it was the first time in a long time I felt he searched for a word less alone. Naya's lips parted. She remembered the cafe, the long afternoons she'd spent helping her mom, the lonely boy who sat by the window every weekend, always with a book, but rarely turning the pages. That was you, she whispered. James nodded. I never forgot that moment. I didn't think I ever would. Something inside her chest crumpled and bloomed all at once. James? He reached out, letting his fingers brush one stray curl behind her ear. The touch was feather-light reverent. It sent a warmth down her spine so fast she forgot to breathe. If I crossed half the city that night because something in me thought I'd found you again, he murmured, would you hold it against me? She didn't answer with words. Her silence was too full of emotion. James leaned in slowly, like he was asking permission with every breath. When their lips finally met, it was a soft spark at first, a tentative question neither dared voice. But then the spark caught fire, deepening, pulling them closer in a way that felt inevitable. Her hand slipped up the front of his shirt. His fingers found the small of her back, anchoring her, as though he'd been searching for a place to land for years. The kiss wasn't frantic. It was deliberate, unbearably tender, filled with everything they'd denied since that first night. When they broke apart, breathing uneven, his forehead rested against hers. I shouldn't have done that, he whispered, but he didn't move away. And yet, he added, voice cracking ever so slightly, I can't regret it. Nia opened her mouth to answer, and the office door slammed open. Sabrina stood in the doorway. Her expression, shock, rage, triumph, twisted into something predatory. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. The sight alone was enough to destroy everything. Finally, she spoke, voice smooth and venomous. Well, that explains a lot. Nia felt the floor fall from beneath her. James's voice turned cold steel. Leave. Sabrina smiled, slow and knowing. Oh, I'm not the one who should be worried about leaving. She let the words hang, then shut the door behind her with a soft click that sounded far too much like a promise of war. Nia's pulse hammered. This is bad, isn't it? James looked at the closed door, jaw clenched, with the kind of fury that came from helplessness. She'll use this. She'll twist it. She's been waiting for leverage, and now she has it. James turned back to her eyes, fierce pained. I'm sorry. I didn't think she would. Nia touched his arm gently. James, I don't regret it either. He froze. Slowly, the storm in his eyes softened into something achingly vulnerable. Nia, if you tell me to stop, I will. If you tell me the line is here, I'll respect it. Her voice trembled. I don't want you to stop. And that was all it took. He took her hand, not like a man claiming, but like someone asking her to walk beside him. Come with me, he said quietly. There was no dominance in the request, no arrogance, just a man stripped of every defense. She followed him into the night, not to escape scandal, but because something irreversible had begun between them. His penthouse glowed softly from the skyline, not cold or ostentatious, but warm like a lighthouse. Inside, he didn't rush. He didn't grab or demand. He stood in front of her, taking a shaky breath, as if confessing something sacred. I want you, but only if you want me too. Nia placed her hand over his heart. I've wanted you since the first night, she whispered. Maybe even before that, before either of us understood why. His eyes closed in relief, like a man finally stepping into a truth he could no longer deny. What happened after was not frantic or desperate. It was gentle, patient, full of whispered confessions and small touches that said more than any words could. Two lonely people finding solace in each other, not through wild passion, but through quiet, vulnerable closeness. It was the kind of night that didn't need details, only emotion, only truth, only two souls recognizing each other. And somewhere in that warmth, in that soft exchange of breaths and promises, something new quietly sparked to life, unplanned, unexpected, but deeply fiercely meant to be. A beginning neither of them saw coming. A future already shifting its weight toward them. But as dawn crept across the windows, painting the room gold, neither James nor Nia yet understood. This love, this fragile, extraordinary thing they'd just stepped into, was about to come with consequences far greater than a scandal. It would come with life. 2 weeks passed, 2 long, aching weeks in which Nia avoided James more than she admitted to herself. She buried herself in work. She stayed late only when she knew he had already left. She spoke to him only when necessary, keeping her words clipped professional, safer than the truth lodged in her chest. But the space she created didn't protect her. It poisoned her. Because every time she caught James looking at her during a meeting, quiet concern flickering in those storm-gray eyes, her pulse tripped over itself. Every time someone in the office whispered the moment she walked by, shame coiled under her ribs. She was the only black woman in the design department, and now they looked at her like she had earned her spot by climbing into the CEO's arms. Not one of them would ever know how much she'd fought to be taken seriously. Not one of them would care. The weight of it pressed on her shoulders until she could barely breathe. On Friday afternoon, when the office was still buzzing, but her energy had run dry, Naya packed her bag quietly. She just wanted to go home, crawl into bed, shut the blinds, and forget about the way everyone's eyes followed her. She zipped her bag and turned around. James stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his usual unreadable expression. Tonight, his face held something closer to worry. "Nia," he said softly, "we need to talk." She exhaled, exhausted. "James, everything is too messy right now. The rumors, the stares, the whispers. If we keep whatever this is, no one will ever believe I earned anything on my own." James stepped inside, closing the door behind him, as though sealing them into their own fragile universe. "Then trust yourself," he said. "Trust what you're capable of." "But that's not how the world works." Her voice cracked. "People don't see what you see in me. They see a girl who doesn't belong, someone lucky, someone using you. Anyone who thinks that is blind," he said immediately. "It doesn't matter if they're blind," she said quietly. "It matters that the world hits people like me differently, and sometimes harder." James opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. For the first time since she met him, he looked helpless. It hurt more than she expected. She turned away just slightly so he wouldn't see her eyes sting. And that was when it happened. A wave of dizziness slammed into her so abruptly, her hand flew to her stomach. Nia James crossed the room in 2 long strides. "What's wrong? I'm fine," she insisted. But the room wavered and her knees buckled. James caught her instantly strong arms wrapping around her before she hit the floor. Panic flashed across his face. "You're not fine. You almost fainted." "I just need a second." But when she tried to stand, her legs gave out again. That was enough for him. He didn't ask permission. He simply lifted her gentle but decisive, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. "We're going to the hospital," he said. "Now." Too tired to fight, too scared to speak, she let him carry her out of the office. The ER smelled of antiseptic and lemon cleanser. Nia lay on the examination table while James paced the room like a man awaiting a verdict. When the doctor returned with a folder in her hand, Nia's heart thudded painfully. The doctor's expression softened. "Miss Carter," she said, "congratulations. You're pregnant." The world went silent. Nia's breath faltered. Her fingers began to shake. It wasn't denial. It was the shock of her life taking a sharp, irreversible turn. Her voice was a whisper. "This can't be." "It's early," the doctor continued gently. "But the tests are clear. You'll need rest. Your blood pressure is lower than ideal." James reached for her hand. She didn't even realize she was clutching his until she felt the strength of his grip steadying her, grounding her. "Nia," he said, voice rough but sure, "you're not alone. I'm here." The certainty nearly undid her. The doctor gave a few more instructions, then excused herself quietly, leaving the two of them in the soft fluorescent light. James sat beside the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at her like she was something fragile and priceless all at once. His thumb brushed the back of her hand. "Nia, look at me," he said. "We'll handle this together." She wasn't sure whether to cry or to breathe for the first time in minutes. Every fear she'd carried about judgment, about the imbalance between them, about losing herself, shuddered loose. But before she could speak, the door swung open. Cutter stood there. His chest rose and fell, with uneven breaths, as if he'd run the entire way. His eyes darted from James to Nia, to the way their hands were interlocked, then to her stomach. His face drained of color. "Nia," he said quietly, "is it true?" Her heart twisted sharply. "Cutter, this isn't— Did he get you pregnant?" The betrayal in his voice wasn't sharp. It was broken. "And you weren't going to tell me," Cutter James warned, rising to his feet. "Don't," Cutter snapped. "You don't get to talk. You don't even deserve to be in this room." Nia pushed herself up weakly. "Cutter, please. You think I don't see it?" He choked. "How he pulls you into his world. How he takes everything that isn't his. I loved you before he even knew your name." Nia froze. The confession cracked like thunder. "I was always there for you," Cutter whispered, hands shaking. "And he just walks in and takes everything." James stepped between Cutter and the bed voice, controlled, but trembling with anger. "She doesn't belong to you. She chooses for herself." Cutter's eyes glistened with anger and pain. "Then tell me, Nia, who do you choose?" The air constricted. The room shrank. And for the first time in her life, Nia didn't know how to speak. Her future felt like a fragile glass sphere in her hands, one wrong answer, and everything shattered. But before she could form a word, a nurse rushed in breathlessly. "Miss Carter," she said urgently, "your apartment building just called. Smoke was seen coming from your kitchen. We don't know yet if it was an accident or deliberate." James and Cutter both turned toward her, voices overlapping. What Nia pressed a hand over her lower stomach, instinctual and protective. A chill swept up her spine, so violently she trembled. Someone had touched the one place she should have been safe. Someone had crossed a line. And now, the baby inside her wasn't the only life at risk. The flashing lights painted the street in frantic strokes of red and blue. Smoke still curled upward from the third-floor window, Nia's window, like the final breath of something that had almost consumed her home. She stood trembling on the sidewalk, James's arm wrapped firmly around her shoulders. Her pulse wouldn't settle. No matter how many deep breaths she forced into her lungs, her heart kept hammering against her ribs with a single, desperate truth. It wasn't just her life anymore she had to protect. A police officer approached them, soot on his uniform and concern creasing his brow. "You're fortunate. The fire didn't spread far, but we found signs someone manipulated the gas line. Not an accident." Nia swallowed hard, a metallic taste coating her tongue. "Someone tried to—" The officer cut her off gently. "We reviewed the hallway footage." He glanced between her and James. "It shows a woman, blonde, tall, white coat." For a single suspended moment, the world froze. Then James's voice, low and lethal, cracked through the cold night air. "Sabrina." The officer nodded. Behind them, Cutter exhaled a curse and pressed a hand against his forehead. "Jesus, she could have killed you." James turned sharply, anger flashing through the storm gray of his eyes. Not wild anger, controlled, vicious. The kind reserved for someone who nearly took from him the one thing he wasn't willing to lose. He pulled Nia closer, protective, almost instinctive. "No one touches her again. Not ever." Nia leaned into him, not because she couldn't stand on her own, but because her body needed the warmth of someone who cared enough to tremble on her behalf. Sabrina was arrested the next morning. Her confession was fractured, rambling, a tangle of jealousy and privilege, resentment and delusion. She stole everything from me, she spat at detectives. She doesn't deserve the position she has. She doesn't deserve James's attention. She's not even. Nia didn't step into the interrogation room, but she heard enough from outside. Not even the right kind of woman. Not even worthy of him. Not even one of us. Words meant to cut. But Nia felt something unexpected settle inside her instead of pain clarity. She wasn't the problem. She never had been. Holding James's hand outside the precinct, she felt the strength in his grip and realized something that made her chest swell. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. Not even a little. 3 months later, Nia moved into a new apartment, bright quiet, filled with afternoon light and the scent of freshly painted walls. And she paid for it with her own money. James had offered gently, insistently, but she had shaken her head with a proud smile. I want to build a life with you, she'd told him, not live in one you built without me. James had paused, then kissed her forehead with a softness that made her stomach warm. I love that about you, he'd whispered. Everything about you is yours first. They grew closer in those weeks, not with fireworks, but with steady, patient gravity. Dinner together on the couch. Ultrasound appointments where James held her hand tighter than she held his. Quiet mornings when he pressed a kiss to her shoulder before work. Love had settled over them like a warm, ever-present sunrise. Cutter had left New York shortly after. Before boarding his train to Chicago, he hugged Nia so long she felt her throat tighten. I'll always love you, he murmured, but I want you to be happier than I want to have you. She cried the entire subway ride home, but she understood, and she hoped he would one day find someone who saw him the way she saw James. The day of the fashion launch. Backstage hummed with frantic footsteps, last-minute stitches, and the metallic smell of hairspray. Nia stood near the curtain, watching her designs, her art come alive under the runway lights. Models of every shade and size wore her pieces, embodying freedom, resilience, and the fierce beauty she'd always carried quietly inside. James approached from behind, slipping an arm around her waist. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted with a shaky laugh. Good, he whispered. It means you care, and everything you care about turns brilliant. He adjusted the necklace, resting against her collarbone, the chain trembling ever so slightly with each breath she took. Then he rested a gentle palm on her small, rounded belly. Both of you, he murmured, are extraordinary. Her heart turned soft and molten. The show ended with thunderous applause. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward hungry for quotes. One journalist asked James, "What inspired this collection?" James didn't miss a beat. He lifted Nia's hand, lacing their fingers together. She did, he said into every microphone in the room. She showed me that life isn't something you control. It's something you love. The room erupted, but all Nia saw was him. The way he looked at her like she was the first person he ever truly saw. The way his thumb grazed her knuckle with unspoken devotion. The way her world found its center again. 1 month later, James took her back to the little cafe on Mercer Street, the one his mother used to escape to, the one where a lonely boy had once watched a little girl deliver hot cocoa with shy eyes. They sat at the rusted metal table, 2 steaming mugs between them. Do you remember this place? James asked, smiling softly. Nia nodded. I didn't realize it was you. Not until you told me. I didn't realize it was you either, he said, until the night we collided. And even then, something in me just knew. He reached into his jacket. I brought something. Her breath caught when he lowered himself to one knee, slowly, reverently, as though kneeling before something he considered sacred. Not because of the baby, he said. Not because of the scandal. Not even because I'm afraid to lose you, though I am. His voice thickened. But because I've loved you since the day you handed me cocoa and didn't ask why a boy in an expensive coat looked so lonely. A tear slipped down her cheek. James. He opened the box. Nia Carter, marry me. She laughed through her tears, nodding before he even finished the sentence. Yes. Of course, yes. But I'm warning you, living with me is a lifetime sentence. James stood, pulling her into his arms. That's the dream. They kissed like two people who had finally crossed every storm to find a home. The wedding. Autumn wrapped the backyard of Nia's childhood home in gold and amber. Lanterns hung from old oak branches. The scent of cinnamon and warm bread drifted from the kitchen. Friends and colleagues filled the garden. Cutter standing with a quiet, proud smile near the back. Nia stepped onto the stone path, her dress flowing gently around her silky white against her glowing brown skin. The lace she designed herself, forming delicate vines that twined around her belly. James turned, and the way he looked at her, the entire world seemed to still. No CEO, no billionaire, no cold exterior, just a man in love. When they reached each other, James brushed a tear from her cheek. You, he whispered, are the best thing that ever happened to me. The best miracle, the best beginning, the best mistake I ever made. His eyes softened. Because you were never a mistake at all. Nia pressed her forehead to his. You're everything I never dared hope for, she murmured, and everything I choose every day. They kissed as the wind rustled the leaves around them. The applause rose like a warm tide. And under the canopy of autumn, wrapped in the sound of laughter and the promise of new beginnings, Nia and James Holton began the life they had fought so hard to reach. A life not defined by fear or judgment or the world's expectations, but by love in its softest and fiercest form.